All right, Colts Nation, this right here is a huge episode. It's an episode I've been teasing for quite a while. It's an episode I'm hoping a lot of people see, but, at the same time, expectations are the root of disappointment, right? So I don't want to set anything up too much, but at the same time, it's perhaps the most work I've ever put into one single episode of this show in my entire life. The amount of film that I have watched on these wide receivers to make sure I could bring this information to you is irrational on some levels. I mean, to have to try to explain this, like if someone asked me the lengths I was going to, you would not believe when and where I find myself watching film to make this episode, right? And last year I did something very similar with the quarterbacks, but it didn't take quite as long to get it done because we were basically certain we were going to be drafting one in the first round, if not the high end of the second round at worst, right? So even if I wanted to go all the way down and watch the 6th and 7th round guys, it really didn't matter too much because we knew those guys wouldn't be like the franchise quarterback for the Colts, and we knew the opinion on those guys wouldn't really matter quite as much. But this year it's a bit different, right? Because wide receiver is a position, much like corner as well, those being our two biggest needs, that we see guys all the time contribute at these positions from all different parts of the draft, from Richard Sherman to Tariq Woolen, Terry McLaurin. I mean, the list goes on and on. I could play the name game all day. You don't technically have to be a first rounder at this position to be a guy that makes an impact in day one. And with the depth at wide receiver in this year's draft, we could be looking at guys all the way into round 4 or 5 that could potentially make an impact for the Colts in their first season if they were to get drafted to the team. That is, of course, depending on how quickly these guys come off the board. It is kind of tough to project these types of things. We know a lot of teams are valuing the receivers this year. Now, I know that many of you guys don't watch all of the film on these receivers, and I'm not holding it against you. In fact, rightfully so, do you not watch all the film on these receivers? If I did not have a show, I probably would not be as thorough as I am. And how do I know that you guys don't have the time to watch this? It's very simple. When I'm watching the tape on these guys, YouTube is publicly audited. Just like you guys can see exactly how many views I have and how many views any of the other shows have, I can see how many people are watching the film on these guys. And some of my episodes have more views than some of the film on these college receivers. And listen, my show is as niche as it gets. Like, this is only for Colts fans. It's only for you, right? These receivers could be for anyone. So I understand. But my point in saying that is I am very, very confident in telling you that I have watched more film on these rookie receivers than most anyone you will talk to. And why is that? Very, very simple. The goal of this episode is not only to give you an idea of who is who in this draft at the wide receiver position, not just to show my chops and show how much I care about the game of football. I care about the Colts. I am a football guy through and through. I started playing at 5 years old. I have been in love with the game of football my entire life, like all of my life, right? All of my hobbies revolve around the game of football. So it's one to show that I'm not just dedicated to covering the Colts. I'm dedicated to the game of football. And of course, I'm not a professional athlete. I was never in any danger of having that level of talent, but this is kind of my way of participating, right? But I don't want it to just be, that was kind of a digression. I don't want it to just be here's what the receivers are like. I want it to be specifically a resource for Colts fans, for you today, for you next week, for you on draft day. I want this to be the ultimate reference point for Colts fans during the draft, because I'm not just going to cover the receivers and their individual talents. I'm also going to try my best to discuss how they fit into the Colts' current wide receiver room. So on draft day, you could come back to this video and say, oh, we're on the clock looking at receivers X, Y, and Z. You can come back to the video and see exactly which of those guys you may want on the Colts, if, of course, you don't have your own opinion on it or have not watched the film yourself. And not to blow any smoke up my own ass, but I'm going to tell you right now, I could guarantee you this. There is not a single other Colts channel that is going to give you a breakdown as comprehensive as what you're about to get today on these wide receivers. This is just one of those episodes, and I used to, for those of you guys who've been around a while, I've been guilty of being a braggart only because I know how much work I put into the episodes, but you cannot get an episode like this from any other Colts channel, period. It's why you're here, and it's why you're not somewhere else. And excuse me if that sounds a little bit self-righteous or whatever it might be, but that's just how I feel. So just a few disclaimers before we get into it, okay? Number one, this might be a long episode, okay? So you can watch this one however you'd like. You could break it up into pieces. You could watch some now. You could come back later. Or you could just watch it all at once. This is just as much a resource for you to have the entire offseason as it is just an episode for you to watch right now today. Number two, the reason I'm doing wide receivers right now and not corners, I'll get to the corners. I am far more comfortable in my ability to evaluate this position for a number of different reasons. I'm not always right about every wide receiver. That's obviously impossible. But I usually have a decent feel, I think, for this position. I could provide examples, of course, but instead I'm just going to let this year's scouting and then kind of how it plays out do the talking for me. I can let you be the judge as to whether or not you trust me on my opinions on this stuff at all, right? Number three, when I talk about how these guys fit into the Colts, I want you to understand that when I view a wide receiver as a fit for the Colts right now out of the draft, I'm considering that to be somebody who can push Alec Pierce for the starting role on the outside, right? Before the season, there was nobody in Colts media, I don't think, defending Alec Pierce more than me. But he flat out did not deliver this year. And spare me the fact that there were some plays where we missed him open. That's all good and well, but let's not pretend that those plays were the difference between the season he put out and him being a 900 to 1,000 yard receiver, okay? That was not the case. For example, Michael Pittman Jr., right? I know, kind of controversial for whatever reason. I think most people like him, but I don't know. I think some people just think that we kiss his ass a little bit too much. Whatever. I mean, if you don't want to support your guys, whatever, right? When he was at the point in his career that Alec Pierce is at, mind you, both second rounders, he was like 20 times the receiver that Alec Pierce has shown up to be thus far. How anyone can sit here and defend Alec Pierce while also speaking down on Michael Pittman is a perfect example of how backwards and irrational fans can be sometimes, and how you can let your expectations of one guy vary so much from the other and then let that cloud your judgment, okay? I'm very sorry if that is you, but it is the truth. And then number four, I'm about to say, because I'm going to butcher some guys' names, I cannot guarantee you that I pronounce any of the names right. By the way, why am I wearing a hat? Because I haven't showered. I might be having a bad hair day, so I figured I'd put this thing on. It's festive, it's the Colts, it's all of those things, right? So the wide receivers that we will be covering today. I apologize, I'm long-winded on the intro, but there's a lot here, and you could always skip to the timestamps, right? The wide receivers we'll be covering today: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Leggete, Adonai Mitchell, Lad McConkey, Keon Coleman, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, Jermaine Burton, Ricky Pearsall, Javon Baker, and Malachi Corley. That's 14 different guys that we will be covering in this episode today. This is about as deep into the draft as I'd expect the Colts to go to draft someone they want to make an impact in their first season, which seems to be, with the way they describe improvement of this team, they say they need guys that could create explosive plays. Like, they basically are just saying they need another playmaker on offense. I expect them to want someone here relatively early in the draft. So I do eventually plan to release something that goes over some of the guys that are not included in this video. But for now, this is what we got, all right? So buckle up, because we might have a long episode here. Get your popcorn, get a cup of coffee, whatever it is that you might need to get through all of this time of me talking. So let's get into it. But before we do, you know what it is. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride in the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone enjoying the video, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Those listening on the audio version, go ahead, shoot it a 5-star review. It's going to help me, I think, also get out to as many people as humanly possible. But let the people know how much you like it. If you don't like it, don't leave a review. That's totally fine. We're trying to get to 3,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. Going in to next season, we're not close, but we broke 2,100. Let's shoot for 2,200. Most importantly, let's enjoy this one, because I've been excited about this one. This right here is a lot of work in the making, so I hope you appreciate it at the minimum. Whether or not you agree with my opinions on these guys, totally fine. We could talk about it all day. You know, I read the comments. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. briefly, mostly because we're not going to get Marvin Harrison Jr. What can I say about Marvin Harrison Jr. that hasn't already been said? He is absolutely everything you want in a wide receiver. I actually saw something. I don't know if it was true. It might have been clickbait. I didn't fact check it. Did Jim Irsay come out and kind of like last year? Remember last year, Irsay said, hey, we should trade up for Bryce Young. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. I think he said the same thing about Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. I might be making that up, though. Fact check me, okay? Point being, we're probably not going to get Marvin Harrison Jr., but it goes without saying. If we got Marvin Harrison Jr., that's an absolute dream scenario. Of course, he would immediately upgrade this offense day one. Him, Michael Pittman, and Josh Downs all on the field, all at once, actually ends up making us perhaps the premier young wide receiver core in all of the NFL. So, I mean, that is what it is. Marvin Harrison is the type of guy, he doesn't even remind me of someone specifically. You know how when you watch these guys, you try to do like a pro comparison? He doesn't remind me of anyone. Like, he's just Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the type of guy we're comparing future rookies to. I mean, that's how good he is. That's how special he is. He's a generational talent. Everything that everyone says about Marvin Harrison Jr. is true. There's no question about it. Barring a catastrophic injury, he's on a fast track to be one of the top 5 to 10 receivers in football almost immediately. It is what it is, right? Malik Nabers, also kind of unlikely that we get him, but I suppose somewhere within the realm of possibilities. Now, I see the talent with Malik Nabers. I really, really do, right? But I don't love what I saw on tape from Malik Nabers in terms of his ability to catch passes in traffic. And a lot of his reps were out of the slot too, right? Which isn't exactly ideal given the investment that we put into Josh Downs. And it's hard to tell if some of the struggles I was seeing with those catches were a concentration issue or just that his hands aren't strong enough to consistently hold on to the ball while absorbing contact. But when I watched him, I saw way too many passes that he did not come down with that he should come down with, given how highly touted he is. Would I hold a 5th rounder to the same standard that I'm holding Malik Nabers to? No. But the wide receivers in this class are so good that you kind of have to nitpick like this. And I think he's the type of guy that is going to have some growing pains in this league, particularly if he comes in and is the type of guy that's going to get 7 to 10 targets a game. His upside is undeniable. There's no question that he's special with the ball in his hands. That cannot be debated, right? But when it comes to his fit on the Colts, right? Not saying I wouldn't draft him if he was there at number 15, but it's not exactly ideal. Given that compared to some of the other prospects here, he kind of figures to be relegated mostly to the slot. At least that's where he got a lot of his work in college. Now, I know he was next to Brian Thomas Jr., who we will get into, but, you know, we are just invested into Josh Downs. We like what Josh Downs brought to the table. And Malik Nabers, of the guys here, of the best guys in this draft, I don't view as the best fit for the Colts in the case that he got to us. I don't expect him to anyway. My pro comp for him, CeeDee Lamb. At best. Pro comps, by the way, are kind of style of play. It's not to say he's going to be that good. It's just kind of like best case scenario. Who can I see him playing like? CeeDee Lamb. That's what I see out of Malik Nabers. Okay. 2. Rome, Odunze, whatever his name, however it's pronounced. I mean, no disrespect, because this guy right here is the absolute most realistic dream scenario for me. Unlike Malik Nabers, he plays primarily on the outside. At least he did in college. But he has the route running ability to make plays wherever he wants. He's got strong hands, great body control, and can make catches from a number of different angles. Really knows how to use his size. A lot of guys have size, but they just don't use the range. They don't all use the range as effectively as the next guy. He is sneaky fast with the ball in his hands. I am not convinced, by the way, that Rome Odunze doesn't end up being the best wide receiver in this class. I'm talking including Marvin Harrison Jr. Everyone talks about the idea of trading up for Marvin Harrison Jr., who's a perennial top 5 pick in this draft. If we did trade up, the price for trading up for Rome Odunze might be just a little bit lower. And while I view that as unlikely, I would almost prefer a trade up for him than I would Marvin Harrison Jr. And if somehow on God's green earth, does he find a way to the number 15th overall pick, you select him in the first 3 seconds you are on the clock. You don't even think about whether or not to draft a Nate Wiggins or some other corner that is sitting there. You don't even think about it. Rome Odunze is that good. The idea of him and Pittman playing on the outside with Josh Downs in the middle would be elite on day one. I promise you that. Imagine, for those who have not watched, imagine DJ Moore, but if he were 6'3" and 220 pounds. This guy is a special, special football player the Colts would be. Colts Nation would fall in love with Odunze in short order. And knowing that I'm going to be going to Indianapolis for training camp again this year, I just drool at the idea of getting to watch him out there with Anthony Richardson and all of these things. So that's him. Brian Thomas. Let's go there. Now, this right here, this is the first controversial one for me, okay? Because this is a popular name being thrown around by Colts fans. Listen, let me just start here. If he is what some people say he is, what some people expect him to be, he is a perfect fit for what the Colts need, right? But if I'm being honest, there are a lot of guys that I prefer to do the role that we would have Brian Thomas do, like a lot of guys in this draft when you consider where he's being drafted. And I'm going to tell you right now, I do not quite see what other people see. Yes, he is explosive. Yes, he can stretch the field. And yes, he can make contested catches. But I don't see a whole lot of routes being run by this guy. It leaves something to be desired. Let me say his route running. Of course, when I compare, it's tough, right? For me to say, oh, Brian Thomas can't run routes, because if he can't run routes, I can't walk, right? That's how different we are in terms of our athletic ability. But I'm talking relative to the guys. What am I going to do? I got to say, right? Relative to the other guys in this draft, his route running leaves a lot to be desired. And it almost comes off like he doesn't have a natural feel for the game like some of these other top wide receiver prospects would, right? He isn't such a freak that I can ignore some of the deficiencies I see in the route running department. Like, for example, DK Metcalf, right? Some of the same questions I would have about Brian Thomas were some of the same questions that people had about DK Metcalf. But when DK Metcalf showed up to the combine, he put on such a show at the combine that we just had to ignore some of those flaws, because it was so clear and obvious how special DK Metcalf was, and that is proven to be absolutely what it is, right? It was so obvious after the combine that you were just able to ignore some of these things. Brian Thomas, on the other hand, is not DK Metcalf. If you ask me, he is the most likely bust candidate of all of these guys that are being projected to go in the first round. And there are other prospects that I think would really have separated themselves from a Malik Nabers if they were at LSU in the same circumstances Brian Thomas. But I don't know, and I don't say that to put down Malik Nabers. I'm just saying Brian Thomas is one of these guys. I hope the Colts don't draft him. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't see it. I will obviously give him the opportunity to prove me wrong if he's drafted by the team. But just from what I watched on tape, a little drink of water right here, I'm not sure if he really fits in, or rather, if he does fit in. I'm not sure if he's what everyone says that he is. Let me just put it that way. So that's Brian Thomas. Xavier Leggete. He's legit. This guy's legit, okay? This guy is better than Brian Thomas, day one guaranteed. I can tell you that right now. I love what he brings to the table. He reminds me a lot of A.J. Brown, right? 6'3", 230 pounds. It is pretty impressive when you look at the way he moves. He is a physical specimen out there with fantastic body control and strong hands, catches damn near every pass that comes his way, right? And for a guy with all of these athletic gifts, he looks comfortable running routes at all different levels of the field. He's not just a stretch the field type of guy, and he's not just the type of guy that's going to outman someone. He can kind of do these short routes that, you would kind of expect out of a slot type receiver. Now, that's not what he's going to be used for, and I wouldn't consider him to be an elite route runner by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, I do have some questions about his ability to consistently separate in the NFL, particularly early in his career, but that can be worked on, particularly when you have a guy like Reggie Wayne coaching these wide receivers whose route running was really what made him as great as he was. I mean, he is more, I'm talking about now Xavier Leggete, not Reggie Wayne, is more than athletic enough to make plenty of plays immediately for this team while he hones the route running part of his game. It's not that I don't think he can run routes. I just don't think he's an elite route runner. Like, I think there's guys who are more polished in that department in this draft. He has a shitload of upside, in my opinion, and much like Rome Odunze, he fits seamlessly into the Colts offense on day one. I think he'd be a day one starter. That's how good I think he is. Now, next, one of my favorite players in the draft, Adonai Mitchell. All right? Another absolute stud wide receiver in this class with potential, and I can only say this about so many guys here. he has potential to be the best wide receiver in this class, and I don't feel like enough people are talking about it. When I think about wide receivers that fit into what the Colts need, there may be no guy in the entire draft that I like more than Adonai Mitchell. I mean, everyone is talking about Xavier Worthy out of Texas, but he played next to Adonai Mitchell, and make no mistake, you go watch the tape, Xavier Worthy, while talented, is no Adonai Mitchell, okay? He is everything that you want in an NFL wide receiver. He's 6'4", 200 pounds with an impressive combination of speed, agility, size, and precision as a route runner, right? His change of direction on another level, right? Guys that are his size at 6'4" don't always run as fluently as he does. I mean, he can stretch the field if you need him to. He can simply move the chains if that's what you need him to do. And to be honest, he may be the most complete receiver in this draft outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. Again, great change of direction. His acceleration is second to none. He's nimble and able to make catches from a number of different body angles. He just has an ability to make difficult plays look easy, and he is just so sure-handed. His ability to track the ball down the field, his ability to use the length when tracking the balls down. I know some. I think everyone enjoys a good pause here and there, except a couple people. But I'm sorry, I can't help but pause. I'm millennial. I'm Gen Z. What do you want from me, right? That ruined the whole take now because I was giving a very serious take on Adonai Mitchell, and now I've made a joke of it, right? But my only gripe with him would be, I guess, that he could afford to be a bit stronger. But man, I don't think that would dissuade me like at all. And I also don't think that we have a chance of getting him in the second round. I would be perfectly fine taking him at number 15. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I'd be very comfortable with that. If Rome Odunze was not there, I may just pull the trigger on him and call it a day. I mean, I like him that much. I would be perfectly fine taking him a little bit higher than he's projected to go simply because there's no chance we get him in the second round. My pro comp for him is AJ Green, but a bit faster, okay? I think he comes in and on the Colts would immediately push to be 1,000-yard receiver in his first season. I really like Adonai Mitchell, like a lot, okay? Whoever drafts him, Colts or not, is going to be a very, very happy football team for years and years to come. Next, Ladd McConkey. Let me just say, as a white guy, I certainly am not biased against a white receiver. I know some people look at these positions and say, oh, the white guy can't get it done. I know that was me unnecessarily bringing race into it, but I can only speak the truth, right? But when it comes to this guy, I'm going to tell you right now, man, I really don't get it, right? Now, I will say this. Even to this day, when I watch Puka Nacua, I don't quite get how he's effective as he is. Clearly he is, and clearly he's spectacular, right? I can't deny any of these things, but Puka Nacua is one of these guys I watch, and I'm just like, I don't exactly see as a receiver what he does that's so special. Yet here he is with like 1,900 yards, right? So, I will put that there just as like a nod to the potential of Ladd McConkey. So it's not to say that he can't get it done. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what he excels at and exactly what he brings to an NFL team. I don't like him on the Colts. But of course, as I would say with Brian Thomas, I'd be willing to let him prove me wrong if we drafted him. But if we draft someone, we'd presumably want them to come in and be better than Alec Pierce basically immediately, right? If not push him for the starting job. With Ladd McConkey, I just don't see it. And with some of the guys that are going to be available around where he's available, the idea of us drafting him over some of those players, quite frankly, is nightmare-inducing for me. Okay, next, Keon Coleman. A lot of hype around Keon Coleman, and he's another one that I don't quite see panning out. Like, yes, he has hops, and yes, he can high point a ball, and yes, he can make a contested catch. That's all good and well. But much like Brian Thomas, the route running chops and the separation are both pretty non-existent on tape when I compare him to some of these other top prospects. And while I was watching him, I didn't really take him to be quite fast either. Like, he was kind of just explosive in the sense that he could jump. Like, he had I don't even know how to, he had like basketball athleticism, right? And then sure enough, he goes on and he runs a 4.6 40, right? He just seems like the type of player to me whose success relies a bit too much on some natural athletic gifts that he has. But my problem is that I don't think that those gifts are going to be particularly special. at the next level. Like, I don't think athletically he is going to stick out from a lot of other NFL wide receivers. So Keon Coleman is a hard pass for me personally. To be honest, if the Colts drafted him, I'd be surprised if he got much of any action throughout his first season. I think they would end up regretting this draft pick, basically moving forward at all, right? Next, popular name amongst Colts Nation. Let me get a little bit of water. My mouth is so dry right now for whatever reason. Probably should edit that out, but it would take more work. What are you going to do? Xavier Worthy. The speed that Worthy had, and this was before the combine, I was watching him. His speed is so incredible. I was not at all surprised by the 4.21 40, okay? He has a lot of what Indy says that they want in another weapon and may end up kind of being in that range where he's in the perfect draft position for us to get him. I expect him to be there or within range of our second round pick, right? He is special with the ball in his hands. There is no question about that. And Ballard's on record saying that the Colts need another guy that can turn like a 1 to 3 yard play into a 40 to 50 yard play. Xavier Worthy absolutely fits the bill on that front. And I see a lot of people comparing him to John Ross and labeling him as just a speed guy. But I want to challenge you on that a little bit to go watch his tape and tell me that Xavier Worthy can't run the entire tree. And I actually went out of my way because I didn't discount that entirely. I went and watched John Ross's tape like he was one of the rookies this year. And here's, in my opinion, how he compares to Xavier Worthy as a prospect, all right? I see a bit of a better understanding from Worthy on how to use his speed and how to use his athletic gifts. He actually reminds me quite a bit of Paris Campbell in college, who I absolutely loved out of the draft. Take that as you may, right? Now, injuries ended up, to some degree, stunting the growth of Paris Campbell. And in hindsight, the Colts ended up passing on some very good players for a guy like Paris Campbell because of the upside and what he could do with the ball in his hands and that level of explosiveness, right? I mean, they passed on DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, right? And I see them facing a very similar situation and decision in round 2 if they pass on a wide receiver in round 1. I think in round 2, there's a strong likelihood that they could be looking at Xavier Worthy, Xavier Leggete, however you pronounce it, and Jermaine Burton, both of whom I expect to be there. And I'll talk about Jermaine Burton now because this guy right here, this is my call. This is like my guy this year. He may end up being the steal of this draft at wide receiver. When you look outside of the top 3 receivers and Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze, Burton, Adonai Mitchell, and Xavier Leggete are definitely my favorite guys. But for whatever reason, I feel like Burton isn't getting any of the love whatsoever. His style of play is a perfect fit for the Colts, and he could really be used interchangeably with Michael Pittman Jr. if he was given enough time, if not almost immediately. And his numbers are not going to show you just how good he is because he didn't play with any great quarterbacks at Alabama. But I encourage you to go watch this guy's tape and try to deny his upside to me, right? Apparently, he's only 6 feet tall. I was absolutely shocked when I started diving deeper into him after I watched the film. He plays so much bigger than 6 foot. I would have guessed he was 6'3" or 6'4". I mean, he plays that big. And I've seen people say that his strength is average at best. And I also don't see that. He's an absolute bully out there. I mean, he makes so many impressive catches in traffic. He just steals it from guys. And it's hard to see how people could prefer a guy like Brian Thomas to him, if I'm to be 100% honest with you. He plays with a chip on his shoulder that almost teeters on going a bit too far. But I'll tell you right now, man, it is something to watch. This kid is a dog. Like, I am a huge fan of kind of his attitude on the field. Now, I don't know him personally, and I can't speak to his character per se, but, you know, I think it is his ability, or rather his attitude on the field, as well as an incident he got into after a game against Tennessee, which I will not get into, but you can go ahead and Google it. You'll find it very quickly. I think those two things coupled together are going to keep some teams away from him, and perhaps some of you as well. And as I just said, I don't know him personally, and I can't speak to his character. But let's just understand that this is a young man, right? And what he did after that Tennessee game was absolutely inexcusable and not at all what you want from a pro, but his talent is that serious, if you ask me. Like, that serious. It's, again, I love what he brings to the table. If I was a GM, right, his interview would mean more to me than just about any interview of any receiver in this draft. I would be curious to hear his take on what he learned from that situation after the Tennessee game and kind of how he speaks about it. If the character checked out to me in that interview, he would immediately become a first-round guy for me, like immediately. Yet it's quite possible that we see Jermaine Burton available in round 3. And if that is the case, this is the steal of the draft at wide receiver. This is my guy. Even if the Colts drafted a wide receiver in round 1 and I was them and I was looking at him in round 3, it would be pretty hard for me to pass on him just because of how high I think his upside is. Like, I think he has all the tools to be an elite receiver in this league. He just looks that good to me, okay? So that's Jermaine Burton, and that is like my big call, right? If you relate one call to Justin from riding the bench, it's the fact that Jermaine Burton is a savage. I think he's that good, okay? And Adonai Mitchell. Those would be my 2. Okay. Troy Franklin next. This is a good example of a guy that doesn't do anything particularly special, but also is pretty solid all around. Now, his tape does not at all wow me, and I don't think it would wow many people, but it also doesn't scream bust, and it is not. There's nothing alarming on his tape either, right? He does everything pretty well, right? But unlike a couple guys in this range, I would not project that he pushes for a starting job immediately with the Indianapolis Colts, right? He did benefit quite a bit from having Bo Nix throwing him the football, and while I don't want to hold that against him, when I couple that with the fact that there was nothing that he did that I found particularly impressive, it is hard for me to be that high on him. Like, I'm just not excited about the prospect of Troy Franklin, quite frankly. But in short, if the Colts did draft him, my expectations would be relatively low, but I would not be mad at the pick at all. I doubt that they would be willing to settle for Troy Franklin as their first receiver taken in this draft, but he can perhaps be a luxury type of pick, a guy that's proven, a guy that is used to being the number one weapon in an offense, all of these things. If he were to fall a bit later into the draft, I can see this being a pick that works out relatively well for Indianapolis, but I would not expect anything spectacular out of a Troy Franklin. Ricky Pearsall. He is perhaps most known for being Anthony Richardson's go-to wide receiver at Florida and the ridiculous one-handed grab that he made. If you have not seen this one-handed catch by him, it is perhaps the greatest catch I've ever seen in my entire life. And I don't that is not hyperbole. Like, you go watch that catch and you could it's immediately in there with the top 3 catches you've ever seen, period, right? And I really like what he brings to the table. You can just tell when watching Ricky that he is like made of the right stuff, right? He's tough, he's strong, he's sure-handed, he's agile, he's fast. He brings everything you would want out of a prototypical slot receiver in this league, and also a very willing blocker, which is not something you often get to say about a wide receiver. And just a great example of a guy that is willing to do the dirty work, and he gets the most out of his physical ability. Now, the obvious pro to drafting him would be his familiarity with Anthony Richardson. We see more and more teams drafting quarterbacks and then drafting their college receivers. Like, it is a relatively proven formula in this league, all things considered, and it makes good sense. But depending on how high he goes, would the price of that draft pick be worth it for a guy that seems to be pigeonholed into a slot role and would be in the same role as a Josh Downs, who we just invested in last year, right? Because there's no question for me that he's a perfect fit in Indianapolis and that he can help us and he can immediately fill in Isaiah McKenzie's role. Given what we've seen from Josh Downs, I would think that there's a few guys that would be like a wiser pick to draft where Ricky Pearsall may be getting drafted. You know, some would also say this about Xavier Worthy as well, what I'm saying about Ricky, but Worthy has a lot more tape playing on the outside, and he has a lot more reps playing on the outside than Ricky does. So I like the idea of Ricky Pearsall on the Colts, but like, would I want him in the 3rd round? No. quite frankly. The fourth, the fifth, absolutely no question about it. I think he could do very well for us there. Next, Javon Baker. This is a popular guy for people. This is a popular sleeper. And it took me a few games of watching him to finally come around on him. But I ended up really liking him. I'm not going to lie. He's super competitive when he's making these catches against tight coverage, and his ability to stop on a dime and change directions is pretty impressive. Now, I'm not convinced that Javon Baker has like this big-time upside, but I'm also not convinced he doesn't have that upside, right? Will he ever be the best wide receiver on a football team in the NFL? Probably not. But could he be a strong wide receiver too, given some time? I definitely think so. Again, a lot of people have him as the steal of the draft at this position. I'm not quite there. For me, that's Jermaine Burton. But Javon Baker would definitely improve our wide receiver room. There's no question about that. And he'd provide Alec Pierce with some strong competition and reasonable competition. I would be curious to see who wins that battle, because Javon Baker he's one guy that might be a little bit better than I'm giving him credit for. And I can see a world where that happens, but that's kind of my take on him. Malachi Corley. I kind of like this guy. All right. He almost looks to me like a carbon copy of what Rashid Rice just came in and did for the Kansas City Chiefs. And all things considered, a guy like Rice would really fit well into the Colts offense like today, right? Malachi Corley plays bigger than he is and can do a lot of different things. If you need him to play outside and run routes over the middle, he can do that, and he completes those catches in traffic. I mean, his quarterback in college on tape, just the trust that he had in Malachi Corley is as much trust as I saw any of these wide receivers get from their quarterback. It just is what it is, right? If you want to dump it off to him on a screen or a drag and let him create a big play, he can do that just as well, if not better, than he can play on the outside. If you want him to run out of the slot, he's able to do that too. I think he ends up potentially being an awesome value pick in this draft, and I would kind of consider him more of like a steal than maybe Javon Baker is. But for those of you guys that would be looking for a future wide receiver one, Malachi Corley may not be your cup of tea. He may not satisfy your needs, but for someone who wants a guy who could come in and add a playmaking element to the Colts offense in year one, I would not at all mind this pick. I think he fits the bill perfectly. So that was all the receivers right there that I said I was going to cover. I don't know how long that episode was, and I'm not even going to check. I'll just put it out when the time comes. But to kind of just give an overview, the guys that I want on the Colts the most of everyone I just spoke about are as followed. And mind you, I did weigh in the likelihood that we are in position to get them. So someone like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to be on this list. Number 1, Odunze. Number 2, Adonai Mitchell. Number 3, Jermaine Burton. Number 4, Xavier Leggete, whatever it is. Sorry, Xavier. When you come here, I'll figure out how to pronounce it. Number 5, Xavier Worthy. And number 6, Malachi Corley. And with that right there, that is your resource to all of the top talent, or most of the top talent, in this year's draft for wide receiver. I hope this serves as a valuable resource for you. I hope it was an enjoyable listen. I'm sure it was a bit long-winded. And if you made it to the end, I'm very grateful for that. If you have not subscribed, shot a like, commented your opinion on X, Y, or Z, now would be the time to do so. But until next time, my name is Justin. This right here was the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.